Hello everyone, we are live on air with Live on Air, and welcome back to another Philosophy Thoughts episode with me, Olivia Calladine-Smith, your host. I'm a university student at the University of Bristol studying philosophy and French, and I have a passion for philosophical debate and meaningful current discussions. Now, I want to show you how you can use philosophy to tackle your everyday life problems as well as other ethical dilemmas. We will be going from discussions on social media, AI, and other current affairs to crime, relationships, and tips for success and growth. Live on Air is a safe space where you can contribute your controversial and uncomfortable questions so that I can discuss them and tackle them with you all. And for the students out there, you will also be gaining exclusive tips and advice to academic success. I cannot wait to discuss with you all in this judgment-free zone. You can expect to start thinking like a true philosopher. You're watching Live on Air. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome if this is your first time tuning in to my podcast at Live on Air with Philosophy Thoughts, and welcome back to anyone who has watched my previous episodes. Love having you here. So today's discussion topic, as you've seen by the title, is: are athletes seen for who they are or for what they can do for us? We will be talking about racism. We'll be talking about racial discrimination and abuse within football, identity, cultural belonging. And I think it's a very relevant topic. You know, football in today's society is not only a profession for a lot of people, but it's also an entertainment industry, a business industry. And so, you know, whether you play the football or you are a fan, or you don't even watch it at all, you probably have a family member who loves football or plays football. And so, you know, this question that I'm posing is going to be relevant to you in some way, shape or form. I want to start by saying two main disclaimers. My first disclaimer is I'm very much aware that Black people from kind of African or Caribbean descent are not the only people who face racial discrimination within football. But the reason I am focusing on that ethnic minority in particular is because I study French at university alongside philosophy, and I have studied a little bit, one kind of lecture on French identity in sports. And I think especially in the French national football team, there is a huge domination of Black players from African and Caribbean descent. And so I have more knowledge on that kind of area and what those players in particular face. So yes, I'm not discrediting other ethnic minorities and what the racial abuse or any other problems that they may face within football, but it's the kind of the area that I've looked into a little bit more. And the second disclaimer that I want to say is, I suppose it's not a disclaimer, it's kind of just to start off the conversation, but you know, aside from all the kind of negatives in football, there is certainly so many positives in sports. I'm going to start by even going into all the positives about sports, but it also reveals some negatives about society, about the media, about fans. And, you know, I suppose I just want to kind of discuss in a philosophical way why these kind of problems may exist, what that means for the players. And so to start, we can look at a player like, you know, in France that is, you know, very well respected, who is kind of seen as a heroic figure, and, you know, has changed the face of football, I suppose, and that's Mbappe. As of now, Mbappe is an example of a player who represents, you know, the positives of football. And although he's faced a lot of racial discrimination, again, there's the flip side that, you know, football is a good thing. There's players like Mbappe that show that people from those ethnic minorities are able to succeed, are able to have a high status in society, are able to inspire others, are able to, you know, generate wealth for themselves, and be very talented, and be, you know, a symbol of victory for their nation. And yet there's players like Mbappe who, you know, whilst that represents that Black excellence, he's also resented and faces racial abuse if he doesn't bring that success to his nation. There is a huge amount of scrutiny towards these players and abuse that these players have to face should they not bring victory. I think this is a perfect start off to the conversation, because this really does open up my discussion for today, and that's that it shows that perhaps athletes and football players in particular are not kind of seen for being, humans, and they are objectified as, tools that society uses for their happiness, for their entertainment, when they succeed. And the moment that these players don't bring success, fans, the media, the public, they switch on these players, and it kind of seems as if we care more about what these players can do for us as opposed to treating them as actual humans with minds and limitations. I'm really, really going to be interested to hear what you guys think, especially any aspiring footballers who experience this, how they feel about that. And I think this is a moment for us to recognize that we as a society do need to improve, because football does highlight this problem in wider society. I don't think it just exists within football, but rather it's a representation of perhaps the inequalities that exist within society, the lack of unity that exists within society. Football certainly highlights that might be lacking in some places when we see people go to such extents to racially abuse players for not bringing the success that they want. I think the first way I want to tackle this question of whether athletes in sports like football are seen for what they can do for us rather than who they are is the fact that black excellence, especially when we look at the French national football team and the way that they're treated by the fans and in the media, search it up, have a look, you will see all the articles. And it's a perfect example of where black excellence is only respected and only uplifted when these players bring success to France. And so it can be argued that, if these players were actually respected and seen as human and treated as if, for who they are and, everything that it takes to be a footballer, as opposed to just the success that they can bring, the happiness that they can bring to the fans and the players, then when the team does fail, the fans and the public would be more understanding of that and understanding, that these people are humans with minds. They have a lot of grit and determination to be able to play football, have years of tenacity and hard work to get where they have. Ultimately, if people were understanding of that, I don't think people would go to such extremes to kind of mistreat the players. It does very much expose this idea of athletes being just objects that we look to bring us something, as opposed to actually treating them as humans, like separate to their profession. They are humans. And again, this doesn't go for everyone. There are a lot of people who respect football players. There are a lot of people who aren't like this, but there's also that we can also see on social media huge uproars, racist comments when these players do fail. And so it's not something to be ignored or denied. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to a few, very prominent stereotypes that black players especially face. One of the first stereotypes is that black players are only playing to kind of help their families. Now, of course, there are some players who have come from poor backgrounds and they do end up providing for their family as a result of succeeding in their football profession. But as does anyone. I think anyone who becomes significantly successful in comparison to their family, you would help your family. I don't think we can't stereotype and say that's the leading motivation behind every footballer, every black or ethnic footballer. We can't say that they all are only playing, they don't actually care about, the nation. They don't actually care about their profession. They're just doing it as a survival kind of thing. Now, the second stereotype is that the black players in the French national football team, they are not truly French. And, you know, they say these for all sorts of reasons. But then, ironically, when the players win and bring success to the nation, i.e., you know, when France won in the 2018 World Cup, the players were glorified. You know, there was so much respect towards those players. They were seen as French. You know, you will probably see a difference in the articles where they say, you know, French player instead of, you know, when they lose, African player, this person, you know, like they choose, especially the media, they steer this a lot. They pick and choose when they want to call them French, when they want to call them African, and you can see the same kind of thing infiltrating into English football. And yeah, a lot of those players have faced racial discrimination when they miss penalties, etc., etc. And I know, again, it's not just black players. I know there's white players who have missed penalties and also faced discrimination. And the third stereotype I want to touch on is that black players from African and Caribbean descent inevitably are kind of naturally and genetically suited to the football industry. So it kind of takes away from their success. The minute they lose, it's, oh, your genetics have allowed you to get to that position. You know, your ancestors had to run fast and jump high in the jungle. And so that's the only reason you have got to where you are. But the white players are seen more for their intelligence, their cognitive ability on the pitch. They have more intelligence when it comes to football rather than physicality. And so it's kind of represented as, it's kind of unfair because black players are more physically capable to play football. Again, that stereotype is way too generalized. We can't say that every black person is, you know, genetically suited to playing football. And the only reason, we cannot say the only reason some of these black players become professional footballers and do succeed in that profession and are talented, we can't just say that it's nothing to do with their intelligence and their minds and their cognitive ability. And this is really interesting because I'll tell you how this links to philosophy. We can link this to existentialism. Now, existentialism, not to get too bun down with like the word because it sounds confusing, but existentialism is the idea that people are born without a set kind of inherent purpose. So when you are born, you don't just have a purpose to just be a certain thing. You, through your life, you kind of, and freedom and responsibility, you find your purpose, you find your values, you find kind of your identity. So again, in football, we can see how being black is enough to just say, okay, you are perfectly suited for this purpose, you know, that's your essence. No, we can't fix that stereotype and just say that every black person from an African or Caribbean descent, that we can't just shape their identity for them. They have to find their own identity, their own values, their own purpose. And, you know, that's through existing. So I want to actually link a French political philosopher, because political philosophy is a big thing. And his name is Frantz Fanon. He talked about the racialized body. So he was saying, you know, black people are not just seen as a person, but a black person. It's like this idea of being black and a person is just combined. And it's like this black football player, they have these specific attributes, i.e. they're naturally athletic, genetically suited to this profession, as opposed to just seeing them as a person. This person is a person who had to work hard, who has their own mind, who has found their own identity, and they also have limitations. So when that player doesn't succeed and doesn't bring success or misses that penalty, they are still a person. We can't just tear them down and say, oh, you're black, you were meant to be naturally athletic, how comes you didn't bring success? No, these are humans with limitations and minds. And, you know, I think that's a really important idea because it takes us away from the idea of what these black players can do for us and see them actually for who they are, for being human and not just objects to glorify our nation and give us national pride and give us happiness and give us victory. And now I would like to reference Kant. So Kant is a philosopher who kind of focuses on what is the right thing to do. He's very much about duty. And Kant has kind of 3 formulations. I would like to pick up on one specific one here because it's really, really relevant. And he says that we shouldn't use humans as a means to an end, i.e. we should not use footballers as objects for our own entertainment only. Of course, the fans are very much entertained by the game. It's a moment to bring an entire nation together. However, we shouldn't use those players as a means to our own ends, because that's where it gets risky. That's where we could potentially, dehumanize these players. For example, fans only use players for their own well-being and happiness and entertainment. That's risky because it's like, if they lose, then you don't get what you want from them. And that's not what it should be about, because we end up using those players as a means to an end. And as a result, those players do face mental health issues. They don't want to play the profession. They don't want to be in the profession anymore because, they are humans at the end of the day, and they can't win every single time. They can't bring victory every time. And so that can't be the only reason that we follow football. And now the second way that football exposes this kind of idea of using people as a means to an end is clubs using athletes for money. As we know, football is, a business. And this is where kind of ethics and good ethical businesses come in. Should we be good to these players? Do they deserve to be treated rightly as human beings? Or is it just a profit-making business for the clubs? Again, Kant would say, no, we shouldn't be using these players as a means to an end. We shouldn't be using these players just to get, profit maximization, just to get money. We have to treat them rightly as individuals. Another obvious one, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but, nations using players for pride. When the team wins, we have this great sense of national pride. Teams, countries win in the World Cup, the whole country, almost, even people that don't follow football, tune in because they want that to feel that sense of national pride, because they know that's part of who they are. And if they have a small representation of 11 players who can make them feel like feel on top of the world because they feel part of that. And if we focus too much on like what pride that we can get from football, again, we start to dehumanize those players. That's why we can't just focus too much on using them just to bring us pride, because they're not always going to bring us pride. We have to be understanding of the victories and the failures, and push them on and be supportive as a community regardless of that. And lastly, the media using the players as a means to an end, because the media put the players out there in certain ways. They tell the stories in certain ways to get the clicks, to get the viewers, to get the attention, to get money. It's the same kind of idea. And again, that's not treating them as real people and athletes and for who they are. That's just treating them as objects, what they can do for us. It's not the kind of way we want to steer the sporting profession. I think there's so many good things that we can take away from sports, but it shouldn't affect kind of the mental health to that extent, or get so people, fans get so passionate about wanting to win and having that feeling of success for themselves that they're not even aware of how the players actually feel. I think we can look at football and we can think, okay, should we prioritize, character, or should we prioritize performance? I think at the minute we prioritize performance. We are so heavily focused on the performance of these individuals as opposed to their characters. And I think if we're so hyper fixated on people's performance all the time, not just the fans, but the players themselves, if you are over, and I'm saying this, I play a little bit of football, but I'm not a professional. I've not been in, a really professional sporting environment, but not just from a fan's point of view, but from a player's point of view. If you focus too much on performance and your performance, as opposed to your character and your being, that can really drag you down sometimes. It's good to focus on your performance. That's what it's all about. You want to perform really well. But if you hyperfixate on it and you prioritize it way too much, it can be actually counterproductive. There's players who go out and play, they don't play well, they don't perform well, they miss a penalty that they really wanted to get, and that kind of rings on their mind. Oh, I didn't get that goal, I didn't perform the way I wanted to. And yet they forget their character, they forget their being, they forget that they're human, and that they have limitations. And so the players themselves, they can't just see them as objects. They can't just see them as a body. Okay, body, you need to do this. They need to really tap into their minds. And that's why they always say football is a mental game. Football is a mental game. Now, I can speak on that. I'm not a professional footballer, but I can speak on football being a mental game. You have to sometimes detach from the performance, detach from your body as a tool, as an object to do what it needs to do, because your mental is everything. Again, we can use Aristotle and some of his ideas on virtue and character. For the players, if they're able to focus on their character and their being a bit more and detach from their performance, then they won't walk away feeling so negative and then impact their next performance and their next performance and then their entire career, because they're so hung up on one mistake. We can't just support people based off performance all the time. Good performance is not always a signal of success. I mean, sometimes you need to fail. I mean, even looking beyond football, sometimes you just need to fail. Bad performance is what can really make you. And I'm not saying like literally be like, oh, you're amazing, you missed a goal. Like, no. But it's supporting the players. It's coming together as a community, giving constructive criticism. And that is how we treat the players as human beings, how we treat them as ends in themselves, for who they are, as opposed to treating them for what they can do for us. Okay, so to end out this video, I'm going to just answer a couple of questions. First question being, are athletes still seen as human? Based off everything we've discussed today, football can be very shallow. It can be very flaky, very fluctuating, very, it's not stable at all. It seems that, again, they're treated as humans sometimes, depending on what they do for us. The second question is, do you think racism in sports is bad fans or a reflection of society? So for me, again, I think, it's not just bad fans. I think it's a reflection of society. This is a wider problem. When you look at football is actually exposing that within society, because we have such a large amount of people who invest in football, who are interested in football, who watch football, who follow football. Those people are making these kind of problems that exist within society known. And kind of football actually provides the perfect environment for some of these problems to be exposed. I think that's, for me, that's the thing. I don't think it's just football fans are so awful. This is a wider problem in society. These are people from society. We can't separate the fans and the media and all these people. These are all different people from society who go out into the real world and still hold these, similar thoughts and ideas. But it's only in the environment, the passionate environment of football, where people are able to unleash, people are able to kind of share that, and without much repercussion either, because we can see, on social media, the racial discrimination. People go anonymous and they just put whatever they want, and these players are on social media and they are seeing all of that and receiving all that racial abuse, and yet nothing's done about it. For the sake of kind of, in the light of their passion for the sport, they're able to say whatever they want. But again, it's not acceptable, and it just highlights some of the lack of equality, unity, community, multiculturalism, diversity within society at large. Whether this is kind of more or less represented in French football in comparison to English football? I don't know. I haven't really compared the French football as such with the English football, but I think everything discussed today, we can see different bits of it in the French football. I think more so in the French football because, again, I know more about how this problem manifests itself within French football as opposed to English football. But again, I know that this still exists within English football. Perhaps I'll do some more research actually after this video. Even if it's not the black players, the white players, they've missed penalties, they've faced abuse for missing those penalties, and so they can still be seen as athletes who are used for what they can do as opposed to who they are. Yeah, I hope that kind of opened up your perspectives and perhaps why players are seen and treated in certain ways. And perhaps, for some football players who might be watching this, that might have given you a bit of comfort that perhaps someone's recognized what you may feel as a footballer, the pressure that you may feel. Footballers are very hard on themselves. Me, as someone who's, played football, I'm extremely hard on myself. It's a very mentally taxing game. Okay, so that is everything for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoyed this video. Also, make sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at liv.on.air. But thank you so much for tuning in today. It's Olivia Calladine-Smith at LivOnAir. See you next time. Goodbye.